Good afternoon and welcome to the March 2021 Dibble Institute webinar. We're really thrilled to have you all here. We have a great speaker today that is well prepared and looking forward to speaking to all of you as well. My name is Kay Reed. I'm the Executive Director of the Dibble Institute, speaking to you from Berkeley, California. And I wanted to just say a couple of housekeeping things. If you can't hear us, that means something's wrong with your computer, most likely. And so please call in. You have an email from us with webinar specifics. And if you can't hear us, just call in. That's probably the easiest way. Secondly, there's a hand icon on your control panel, and we're going to use that a couple times today. And in fact, I'm going to start right now by asking you, how many of you are brand new to Dibble, to a Dibble webinar? How many are brand new? This is your first ever Dibble webinar. So I previewed the list. I see lots of people I know, lots of people I recognize, so welcome back. And it looks like about a little over 10% are new. So welcome to you especially. We've been doing these webinars every month on the second Wednesday webinar, second Wednesdays. We've been doing it for a few years, so we're thrilled to have you here. You are also welcome to ask questions. I'll be monitoring that box, and Gabe will be engaging Gabe with your questions after the webinar, after his presentation is over. So for those of you who are new, I wanted to give you a little bit of information about the Dibble Institute. We empower teens and young adults. We just updated our mission statement, so I'm going to read it. We empower teens and young adults with evidence-based skills and knowledge to successfully navigate their intimate relationships. We do this as a nonprofit curriculum publisher by supporting organizations with best practices curricula, professional training, connections to funding opportunities, and ongoing technical assistance. And it's in that vein that we've been presenting these webinars with speakers from a group called Project Evident. We invited them to share their insights and tools back in October. Gregor Thomas talked about small tests of change. Last month, Sarah DeTroya talked about scenario planning. And this month, we have Gabriel Rhodes, who's going to talk about demystifying the learning agenda and practical tools to organize our thoughts. So a little bit about Gabe before he gets on. He's was the Director of Evaluation and Learning for the Edna McConnell Clark Foundation. This is so hilarious. He's also the co-founder of the Emmy-nominated Immersive Film Collective Barbecue or BBQ Films. He has an MBA from Columbia and did his undergraduate work at the University of Chicago. One of our key values is research, and it's not only in the research that we do on our content around intimate relationships, but we really believe in research around how to run our company well, how to run our organization well. And so it's in that vein to think about how can we each have our organizations learning machines. I give you Gabriel Rhodes. Gabe?
I'm going to take myself off mute. So wonderful. Thank you so much, Kay. And it's not often in this context that I have to contend with barbecue films also being mentioned in my background, but that's great fun and another part of my life where I tell stories with film. But here we're talking about telling stories that help us make decisions and stories with data. And the way that one of the ways that we really try to help organizations is through thinking about a strategic learning agenda and looking into the future of what you need to know to be able to make strong data-informed decisions about your program. And so that's the flavor of this entire presentation. And I just want to say it's a deep privilege to be sitting here in front of all of you, and a privilege to be asked to do this by Kay and the team. So with that, I'm going to start with just a few of our goals for this conversation. So go to the thank you. And I want to say that in this conversation, we really want to be able to familiarize you or have you leave with a familiarity with learning agendas. And learning agendas don't live in of themselves. How do you actually turn that learning agenda into a strategic learning plan? And how do you use that to create action and informed decisions? The way that we're going to do this is we're first going to start with one part that really demystifies learning agendas. And the second part that just offers you a practical tool and worksheet to organize your thinking, as Kay was saying, organize your thinking around how you ask powerful questions, get some information to make those decisions, and then how that who you include in that decision, how that results in a path forward. I do want to say at the top here, before we go into any additional slides, that I really appreciate everybody that took the time in registering to offer some insights from your work about your familiarity with learning agendas, questions that you're contending with, and just a note of appreciation. And I want to say that 72% of you answered no to the question, are you familiar with learning agendas? And so we're really going to start with this, this, what is a learning agenda? Why do you use it? How do you use it? Is a way to ground us. Take a little pause and see if that made sense to folks, and then we're gonna dig into the tool, which is really a streamlined, simplified version of how to approach that. One just quick note on my background to add to what Kay said is that I started off in a small mentoring organization. I've also worked at a research shop and as a funder. And so I've really been able to sort of see from the point of view of a practitioner, a research firm, a funder of evaluation, how some of these learning agendas play out. And I just want to normalize just how confused people are about learning agendas, including myself. I remember, even as recently as a half decade ago, somebody saying, "Okay, time to create a learning agenda for an organization." And just scratching my head to figure out exactly how to do that. And part of my presentation here is, really teaching myself how to do that and helping to teach others. And so it is easy to be mystified by this. And so just want to say that out loud right at the top. So let's go to the next slide, which is just going to tee us up what Project Evident is. Just want to say a few words about this at the top. Because our approach to this work is really important in how we do it. Our purpose as an organization, we are a nonprofit, is to really harness the power of evidence for greater impact. And so, our core belief is in empowering practitioners to own their own evidence agendas, to own their own learning agendas, and to really be able to organize their surrounding ecosystem, stakeholders, the work that they do to really produce better and more outcomes for communities. At the end of the day, we all care the most about the people that we serve and how to best support them and how to best listen to them and deliver to them what they need. And so we really organized all of our principles around how best to do this. If you get to go to the next slide, you'll see just a simple, diagram. It's missing a little circle here, but you get the basic idea of the centrality of our approaches on practitioners, of which we have many, if not all, participants on this call, and really think about how do funders, policymakers, and researchers best support practitioners in their evidence agenda, and how to support you all in your best support for community outcomes. You'll hear me using the word evidence a lot. I'm going to define that in a few slides. So if that word itself feels a little opaque to you, we'll try to make it a little more clear. The final thing I'll say before jumping into the content is the work that I lead in my role is the strategic evidence planning process for governments, for philanthropies, and most importantly, for our nonprofit partners. And so we have an array of domains that we work in. We have an array of type of partners that we work with. But our entire work is really organized around how do you mobilize your data, your information, your analysis, your evaluation, your evidence building in alignment with your strategy and the outcomes that you want to see for communities and the outcomes that communities have asked you to provide. And so the entire practice is, how do we unify that evidence building, evaluation side of the shop with the strategy side of the shop to create better outcomes? And so in doing that, I lead what's called a strategic evidence planning process. You'll hear a little bit more about that later, because to make this presentation, we've sort of shrunk that down into 2 pages, which is provided as a handout. So without further preamble, let me jump into what we're going to be talking about. Part 1, Chapter 1. How can learning agendas support evidence building and strategy? So let's start by demystifying these things. Let's go to the next slide. So we are going to start our conversation at the level of a whole organization. And then we get into some of the tactical, smaller decisions later in part 2. We're going to talk about how do we ask a specific question about a program, or how do we ask a specific question around a particular decision you're trying to make. But right now, just to sort of ground us in how do learning agendas help an organization, we're going to start at that organization level. Now, some of you might be in leadership roles where you're really thinking about that entire enterprise-wide ecosystem. Some of you may be in programmatic roles where you're thinking about a specific program or a specific set of services that you're providing. Let's just start at the organization level for right now. And if this feels sort of less applicable to the particular sphere of work that you're in, we're going to try to pick that up in that second phase. All right. So let's get to the next page. What is a learning agenda? So what we really want to ground in is that a learning agenda is, at its simplest form, just a set of questions. It's a set of questions that guides an organization's measurement, evidence building, and continuous improvement strategy. Where does it come from? Well, we want to, many of you have theory of change, logic models, program theories. We ground on all of that, can state hypotheses about what you are doing and what you assume will happen, those outcomes that you assume will happen for it, or what you're doing operationally to support the program that you assume will support it and then make things happen in the world. And really takes that and surfaces gaps in knowledge and evidence building so you can know better and make better decisions. Why do we do it? Well, we can prioritize some of these questions to not just surface them, but really understand which ones are the most important, to understand what you need to learn, what you need to build evidence to demonstrate impact, to advance your strategic objectives, inform decision-making, inform continuous improvement, and to take that and to actually structure your set of evidence activities around that. Now that's big, that's enterprise level. We can talk about what it means tactically for a smaller decision, but at the biggest level, the enterprise level set of questions that really help you advance your strategy and continuous improvement so you can really understand what evidence activities you need to put in place to support that. Let's go to the next slide. Here's where I define evidence. So you hear me say evidence the entire way through, and I used to say, evaluation or data a lot, and we as a team have landed on the word evidence and even put it in our name, because we really feel like this is one of the more, for lack of a better term, ecumenical ways to describe all of those activities that you use to collect information. So evidence is its simplest form, data plus analysis to inform decision making. Data can come in many forms. Sometimes it's quantitative data, sometimes it's qualitative data. Data comes in many forms. You apply analysis, either listening to a set of focus groups or collecting information from friends and colleagues in the field, up to, large data sets about outcomes that your participants are experiencing, or big swaths of data about challenges or problems in the community that you're applying analysis to inform decision making. I just want to ground in this. Evidence is just simply data plus analysis to inform decision making. Let's go to the next slide. So what makes a strong learning agenda? So if a learning agenda is just a good set of questions that helps you advance your strategy, helps you organize your evidence activities, what's a good one? I often quote a colleague of mine, Tanya Bier, formerly at the Center for Evaluation Innovation, in her statement that it is a narrow set, energizing, forward-looking, action-oriented, strategic questions that, if answered, could make a real difference in your work. So that's the bar that we're holding ourselves to. It can support your work, just to get a little more granular here, in ensuring that a measurement strategy is collecting the data that you need to clarify what knowledge the organization should be collecting and how it's storing it. So there's a knowledge management flavor to this. Aligning within and across teams and with community on when and how data is collected. And so this can really be a participatory or way to share insights and collect insights from community. A way to provide the team with a plan to focus performance monitoring data. And then also going beyond that to identify needs for evaluative activities outside of regular performance monitoring. Learning agenda, once you've got it prioritized, can really help you advance all of these. Let's go to the next slide. How do we do it? Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we take an approach of defining a learning agenda. There are multiple approaches. If you Google it online, you'll see different ways of taking an approach, and different folks that set up learning agendas do it in a different way. As we have tried to simplify it for our nonprofit partners, we've really landed on these 3 steps. So at the first, we brainstorm and surface a set of priorities. We'll identify questions, keep it broad, surface those that are most pressing. Often when we are doing this with one of our partners, we will just create a humongous list of brainstormed questions, 50 or 100 or more, to really identify what's really alive for folks right now. But then we really need to apply a step, and you'll see this in the second step of really sharpening and aligning those questions. So we analyze them. We understand where there's duplicates. We pressure test which ones really are the most important. We take ones that are answered in other ways by normal processes off the list. Push them for actionable formulation. And then, most importantly, we ensure values alignment. How are you asking the questions? How are you including your community? What values and principles does the organization have, and do those questions really help advance that? What is your strategy as an organization? Do the questions help advance that? Once we've got that pinned down and we really have our prioritized list of questions, then we can really develop a measurement strategy and learning plan. We can connect those learning questions to measurement and the who and the when of learning and decision making. Talk a little bit more about that later, and we'll get to a really granular example a little bit later. But at its highest level, we want to know, what are your regular processes as an organization? Where are you asking some of these questions? Where are you answering them? Are you answering them with community in partnership with your stakeholders? Are you answering them at leadership team meetings or program meetings? How are we understanding where you're asking these questions, where you're answering them, who's doing that, and what information you need to be able to make decisions or to advance to the next level of a question? So with that, let's go to the next slide. Importantly, in understanding these basic questions, we'll often ask, is if you just ask a set of folks, what are all the questions that you have about your work? That can be really hard to bound. It can be even hard to get started. Sometimes it's hard to just even ask a simple question if the universe is huge. You all did a great job on the sign up for this webinar and talking about things that were live for you. But if we're doing this with a large group, we want to make sure that we can actually give them some sort of guideposts. And what we'll often do in developing goals for an engagement or in surfacing initial questions in a learning agenda and helping people brainstorm is we'll ask them, what do you need to do with evidence? What kind of decisions do you need to make? What kind of decisions do you need to influence? And so we will ask, evidence to what end? So if we just defined evidence, we're often asking, well, why are you collecting evidence and how are you using it? You don't just start an evaluation. You don't just go and collect data. You as an organization, are really often most interested in how you actually use that, how you apply that to your work. And so we'll do that in a couple of different categories. Impact. How do you understand what impact your programs are having? Improvement, questions that are related to optimizing your program or codifying your best practices, or understanding and testing, like Kay just mentioned. My colleague Gregor came to you all several months ago to talk about how do you test program adaptations. A number of folks in the sign up for this session talked about, do we add a component to our program? Do we change our program? Do we change our program given the context in which we are operating right now in the pandemic, where so much is happening virtually? And so improvement can loom large. Scale, understanding what information is important to you if you are intending to scale a program. This can often take the form of, if we serve larger numbers, how do we do that? If we serve communities that are outside of the community that we are currently operating in, will outcomes shift? Will needs shift? Is the community asking for different things? Folks are often asking questions about sustainability. So how do you develop evidence to attach to important funding streams, or to set up information for public or private funders that are really helping you sustain your program? And then finally, we often run across organizations that are interested in not only the provision of services, but in influencing the systems in which they operate. So how are you using evidence to advocate for policies and systems change affecting your target population? These are all different flavors of evidence building. And well, sometimes folks look at this list and say, yes, all of it, right? In fact, you might be saying that right now, sitting in your seat. Yeah, these are all really important. We'll really push people to say, well, what's the highest priority right now? Right now is sustainability the biggest priority. Right now is improvement and adaptation the biggest priority, which was very much true for a number of our partners, particularly this time last year, as they were furiously adapting their program models. So that's when we start. Evidence to what end? Let's go to the next slide. When we get to sharpening and aligning these questions, you can say, well, how do we do that? That simple box that I had in the earlier slide doesn't really give too much to hang on. So here's a process that we follow. We'll ask, well, of these questions that we've surfaced, not only are which ones the most pressing right now or feel the most strategically aligned, but also how useful are these questions? If we were to answer a question, how actionable is it? Can your team make use of that information? The second thing we'll ask is, how much effort will it take to collect information around that? Now, we can calibrate different types of evidence collecting approaches or measurement strategies to make sure that we are expending the right amount of effort on a question. But it is important to ask ourselves, is this a question that is actually too difficult to answer? Do we need to break it down? Do we need to ask a question that is well in advance of the question that we have sitting on the page? And then finally, validity. How credible evidence is the evidence that we can generate around this? Can you accurately measure it? Do you only have access to a certain amount of information that will not make it easy for you to be able to answer a question without collecting additional information? What level of rigor is demanded by the type of question that you're asking? Folks will run into this validity question quite a bit when they're trying to ask and answer questions with external stakeholders in mind, or if they are pressing themselves internally to really come up with causal information about whether or not a program caused a particular outcome. So we'll find ourselves hanging out in this validity question quite a bit with some of those larger impact or stakeholder type questions. Let's go to the next slide. What does this let us do? So I promised you this idea that we'd be able to come up with a good direction to a evidence plan or a strategic learning plan from coming up with a good set of learning agenda questions. And I just wanted to give you a sense of where that can go. Now, we'll not go there necessarily in this conversation, but this is a good a good slide to just sit on for a moment and say, you're not going to answer all questions or all of those flavors of evidence building with the same type of evaluative tools, the same type of evidence building tools. So if you're asking impact questions like, can we show that our program caused a particular outcome for our service population, you may be hanging out in the impact category, and you may be looking at some summative evaluation. You might be looking at experimental or quasi-experimental evaluation. But we don't always go there, right? Scale might also demand that, but if you're thinking about improvement, you may be thinking about some simple performance monitoring questions, or questions that help you structure dashboards or structure codification and documentation. If you're looking to sustainability, you're looking to systems change, you might be looking at narrative data. You might be looking at great case studies. You might be looking at the type of information that can really explain trends for communities and participants that allow you to answer questions that are located with your organization, or questions that you're trying to answer, key questions you're trying to answer for your stakeholders. So the simple purpose of this slide is to say that different learning questions in different types of categories of evidence to what end will require different types of methodology to answer. And so it's not one size fits all. We don't see a learning question and say, well, let's launch an evaluation. Or, let's see a learning question, let's launch a focus group. Or, we see a learning question, let's just launch a set of case studies, or what have you. But you can really form fit your evidence strategies, your learning plan, your evaluation plan, or what we call a strategic evidence plan, whatever it shows up as in your organization, against the type of questions that you're asking the audiences you're trying to influence, internal or external, and the evidence to what end category. One last note: impact, improvement, scale, sustainability, systems, they are not, in consultant speak, mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. There's a bleed over between them. There's certainly ways in which you're asking questions that are outside of that. Maybe they're operational in nature, et cetera. And so I'll offer this as illustrative, but not as exhaustive. Let's go to the next slide. So we're going to talk about some good examples of good questions. I find it's a little bit better to get practical and share some questions that others have asked and answered, or are working on answering for themselves. And then we're going to just talk about what it looks like in practice to answer that. All right, so let's go to the next slide. I'm going to move through these pretty quickly. Organizational. I'm going to give you some different valence levels that you can ask questions in an organization. So let's start at organization. So we have one partner that is asking of themselves, what approaches that we are doing may be unintentionally upholding values, tactics, or strategies in the ecosystem that reinforce inequities. So this is fundamentally an equity question. How are we unwinding our own systems, and how are we unlearning a set of things that we are doing so we can reinforce equity instead of reinforcing inequity? Let's go to the next one. So the programmatic level is something that you may all be familiar with. In fact, it has a flavor of some of the questions that you were asking in your pre-conference registration. The one partner that's asking, what components of our program model, let's say workshops or expert feedback and guidance, or the peer network, or benchmarking information on the outcomes of other program models, right? What components of that program model do the leaders that are enrolled in our program find most helpful for their work, and why? So this is fundamentally an improvement question, maybe even a narrowing of the program model question. It's a programmatic question. Let's go to the next one. I want to leave out operational, because oftentimes we find learning questions that, even though a lot of us here sit in a programmatic role, the operations and support and infrastructure of our programs are critical in developing out and delivering outcomes for communities. And oftentimes we'll run across learning agenda questions that ask of that internal operation something like this. One partner asked, what internal capacity and technical assistance is necessary for us to implement a pilot we are intending to implement? What's the total cost of that pilot in terms of staff and contracted hours? So let's talk about resource allocation, right? This is, if we're setting up a pilot, that's not a zero sum. It has to add on to what people are already doing. So we'll find partners asking operational questions about capacity, about internal processes and systems that are supporting the program. If you advance to the next slide, I think it just leaves all of them up. But I just wanted to say that learning agenda questions can sit at multiple levels. Let's get to the next one. This just circles back around to the beginning to say, once you've pinned these, you can then ask yourself a set of questions tied right back to the beginning. Is the measurement strategy collecting data needed to drive decision making around this? Is the knowledge the organization is storing, collecting, actually meeting these needs? You can then really understand what a strategic learning plan can give you, because it may mean that you collect information different ways, store information different ways, talk about it in different ways, and you can restructure or retool or just maybe even tweak a little bit some of your organization's processes to be able to answer those in a durable way, in an evergreen way. Let's go to the next slide. So let's put this in action. All right, I'm going to spend about 5 minutes on this before we wrap this section, and really then we can dig into a tool. And if we have time, I'll do a little storytelling about an organization that has really that set forth a particularly narrow learning agenda question and then set about asking and answering it. If you hear noise in the background, I'll just say that is what I call 5-year-old interference. Hopefully you find it as joyful as I do, but sorry for any distraction in the background. Putting learning agenda in action. What are we talking about? You ask a question. How do you answer it? All right. So let's just take a life of a question. Let's take a tour through how you answer something. So you've set your prioritized learning agenda question. Thank you for the advance. Let's develop a learning plan. Well, we have a question. Let's come up with a hypothesis. Based on the question, what are we testing? All right. So let's ask a good yes/no question that contributes information. All right. Now let's ask ourselves, what data do we need to be able to answer that yes/no question? Okay, let's just talk about the data points and the data collection tools that we need to be able to do that. Again, might be as simple as a focus group, might be as complicated as summative evaluation. Who? Now this is really important. Determine who needs to review the data. Who should be able to talk about it? One of our partners very powerfully asked me, who gets to talk about this information that we're collecting? This is fundamentally a equity, a point in the learning plan that is a real, you should be thinking about equity the entire way through it, but a really important linchpin in how you think about your, in how you involve the attitudes, the needs, the reflections of the community that you're supporting. So you can list the people to review the information. You can take a focus on equity. Are you playing back what you're collecting from your community partners in such a way that they can say, yes, this resonates, no, it doesn't? Some of our partners actually do what they call a community peer review, where they share with their community what they have learned from them and ask them, does it make sense? Does it resonate? Does it resonate? Are we taking the right insights from it? So the who, I find, is a very important part of this. When? Okay, when are we going to talk about it? Who's involved, but when are we going to talk about it? Are we talking about it with over a series of meetings with community and internally? Are you talking about it at a leadership team meeting? Where are you getting that decision, or where are you getting that input? And then finally, let's aim towards a decision. Let's document a decision for this that this learning plan can actually support. All right, we're all aiming towards a decision. What are we deciding at the end? Now, when I give you that tool, which some of you might have already downloaded, it's going to start with that decision, because that's actually a place where people more naturally start. This is more an illustration of like, what's the journey that this learning agenda question can take. I find this formulation a little bit easier to be able to tell the story of a learning agenda question, but you're often going to start with a decision that you need to make, particularly if you're facing something that is an urgent decision or an urgent learning that you're thinking about. But when we think about at the organizational level, again, which is where we grounded, you may be thinking more evergreen learning questions, where the decisions, multiple decisions are happening with the learning agenda question you're asking. If you just remember back a few moments to the question we're asking about whether or not the policies, procedures, and practices of an organization are reinforcing systemic inequities, you're going to be making a number of different but related decisions underneath that one big evergreen question. So that's why the decision sits at the end here, but we'll start with it when we think about it in terms of a particular decision and what you're trying to drive. Not seeing all of your faces and whether or not you're sort of squinting at me. I don't know if that makes sense or not. We'll see if we can push on that a little bit more as we move in. So let's go to the next slide. There's going to be a lot on one slide, but I'm going to tell you the story, so you don't have to focus in the slide. You can just listen, right? So here's an example from one of our partners, anonymized to protect their confidentiality. So this partner has a coaching program. It doesn't particularly matter what flavor of coaching program is or who the audience is, but let's just talk about the coaching program. Just training coaches, all right? And those coaches are then supporting coachees for better outcomes in this particular case in an educational system. So organization has a set of larger North Star impact goals. So they're asking themselves, programmatically, how well are we contributing to that progress? All right, well, then we're going to ask ourselves, of all the individual programs that we do, how well are they contributing to positive outcomes for individuals and communities? And then we drill down to a particular question that influences this particular coaching program. Do the coaching program participating coaches demonstrate increased leadership competencies relative to their goals? Well, let's talk about a hypothesis. Well, coaches that demonstrate good progress, so we're training the coaches, and they have a good relationship with their coachees, will have a positive impact on the leadership skills of the coachees in the program. So if we do our job with coaches, they do their job with the coachees, we're going to be able to see positive, we're going to be able to see the development of leadership skills. So what are we testing? Is there leadership skills or not at the coachee level? And what indicators are we collecting? Well, I'm going to collect some coach progress, collect some coachee progress indicators. I'm going to collect some feedback from key stakeholders. And we're going to be able to do this at an annual basis with one of our tools, semi-annual basis with some coach ratings, 3 times over a 3-year program with key stakeholder survey. And we're going to be able to look at what the particular coachee leadership goals are in the program and what they're self-assessing themselves against. Well, who's going to review this? Well, if our audience for this, if the community for this is the coachees and the coaches, because we're training the coaches too, then we're going to be talking about it with the team that's leading the coaching program and the faculty. We're going to be talking about it with the coaches in training, and we're going to be talking about it with the coachees. We're going to involve everybody in this conversation. In fact, we may even want to push ourselves and talk about the folks that the coachees are influencing in the education system. But I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole. We're going to talk about it with all of our participants. Well, when are we going to review it? That's a cohort model. We're going to review it at the end of cohort 2. And the relevant decisions to this is we're going to evaluate the potential of the coaching program to deliver the ultimate aim. And we're going to assess if this program, as currently formulated, should be modified, if it should be scaled, or if it should be stopped entirely, right? So this particular partner is thinking, well, we've invested a lot in this. Let's see if these leadership skills are being advanced, and if they are, great, let's scale it. If there's some ambivalence around it, well, maybe let's improve the program. And if we can definitively say we're not advancing these leadership skills, let's consider stopping the program. It's a big decision, right? So we started with a big question, we got down to a granular question about our program, and then we pulled back and we were thinking about a big organizational decision here. So I'll just leave this with you. It's a bit of a life of a question. You can lay these out aligned with particular programs or particular enterprise learning agenda questions, but sometimes it's practical to just talk about how this flows through an entire organization. And I believe that brings us to the end of chapter 1. About 10, 15 more minutes, and so we're going to push through our second chapter, which is just a practical tool. We just want to give you a tour of it, and if we have a few minutes at the end, I'll tell you a story about how an organization has stepped through a process like this. Before I do that, let me ask if maybe for a show of hands, going to ask two questions. One, who feels that learning agendas have been at least a little bit demystified? Let's ask for a show of hands. And I'll ask for Esther to let me know if that has if we see a fair amount of hands on that.
Yeah, we're seeing a fair number. Some maybe not all the way, but several yes.
Okay, so
it's at about 16%.
Yeah, 16%, a little bit
Right.
demystified. Okay, so we're going to push on this tool and see if this helps get it real specific. Who has remained entirely like, I still have no idea what a learning agenda is or how I might use it? Feel free. I always try to ask for brutal feedback. Who is like totally unclear at this point? Feel free to raise your hand. And if it is the rest of the, if it's the rest of the 84%, that's totally fine. All right, what do we see in team? Who is totally still in the dark about learning agendas? Totally fine. And I've remained in the dark about learning agendas for most of my career, so that's totally appropriate. I expect you to get there after 35 minutes.
The dashboard is only showing 4%.
Oh my goodness, you guys are very generous.
Yeah.
So that's great. So 16% feeling good, 4% totally still in the dark, and then a bunch of you right in the middle. So let's push to this next part, okay? So we're gonna do this over about 10 minutes. Kay and team, I'm gonna try to tell that story in about 3 or 5 minutes, wrap about 5 minutes to the hour, maybe a little bit more, all right? So let's apply this to a single decision. Let's get really practical and tactical with this, okay? So that was sort of more abstract, big picture, enterprise-wide learning agenda, right? Okay, now let's just get this to a single decision. So our goal is to put a simple tool in your hands. This tool is not magic. It's not going to immediately generate data-informed decisions, but might help you organize your thinking a little bit. If you are already sophisticated at this might be something useful to like run through with somebody else. If you're feeling less confident in structuring your learning around a specific question, we're hoping this tool might be helpful to you individually. We've shared it with several others in the field. If you do download it, do use it, let us know. We always interested in for feedback. Like I said before, both positive and negative. It's all good information for us. Let's go to the next slide. So what do you have here? We have a tool that shows up on 2 pages, and it walks you through a super lean version of what we call our strategic evidence plans. We try to establish a goal for what you're trying to learn, how will you learn it, what your capacity is for learning, what you need to go and get, how much it's going to cost you to do it, and then what the process is for making that all happen. So I'm going to try to do that in a page. It'll take you less than half an hour to fill out. Okay.
Excuse me, Gabe, can I this is Kay, can I interfere here? This is in everyone's download, or Esther, this is in everybody's download on their control panel, so you can download this form. Is that correct?
Yes, you'll find it under handouts.
Great, thank you.
Esther, thank you for that. Kay, thank you for slowing me down. All right, so if you want, you can download this, and I'm just gonna walk through, I'm gonna walk through what this thing is, how you use it, right? Let me just tell you the story about how you walk through this, tool, all right? So we start with like, what is your top of mind question right now? What are you trying to decide? Are you trying to decide whether or not we add another hour to our programming? Are you trying to decide, do we keep our program virtual when everybody can go back to in person? Something that showed up on the comments in advance of the seminar. Do you want to decide if you're going to offer a different therapeutic delivery? What are you trying to decide right now? What's a live question for you? And when are you trying to decide it by? It's just helpful to sort of mark that down. Maybe it's Friday. Maybe it's Q3. When are you trying to decide this by? We then invite you to do a little bit of that brainstorming I was talking about before. Well, what do you need to know to answer that? What do you need to know to make your decision? So if your question is, do you want to keep on offering your entire program virtually? Maybe you want to know if that's what your participants want. Maybe you want to know in the time that you have been delivering a program virtually, have you been able to get similar outcomes if you were previously delivering it in person? What do you want to know? Let's brainstorm some of these ideas. From that, we then try to force you to prioritize a single most important question. Now that might be hard. Maybe you come up with two, but just the discipline of what is your decision? What all do you want to know? Now let's narrow down what's the most important thing to know. If you have that, we can then move to the next. So let's move to the next slide. So we then ask you to determine your organizational capacity to collect the data that that question implies. So what do you need to know to answer that question, right? And so this could be a little simpler for you, and you can maybe just fill it out with just the internal data side part of it. But we've really forced people to think about what information do you have inside of your organization, what information do you have outside of your organization that you can get your hands on, and what information is entirely new. So just ask a set of questions around this. Okay, you know, what data do you hold that will be important and pertinent for that learning question, for that decision? Do you have the capacity inside of your organization to analyze it? And if not, what do you need to do to be able to complete that analysis? Now, you might have the data, but you might not have a person to be able to analyze it. You might actually have to go find somebody. You might have to go find help somewhere else in your organization. You might have to go find help outside your organization. Doesn't matter. Just jot it down. External data. Are there data that other people hold that can be helpful for this? Maybe these are implementing partners. Maybe these are, you know, if you work inside of a housing authority, maybe this is something that your partners at the housing authority hold, for example. And do you have, you know, a way to access it, to analyze it? If not, what do you need to have in place? Do you have a relationship? Do you need to have a data analyst? What do you need to get to know this? And then new data. If you're asking a question that is wholly new, right? And I'll tell you the story in a few minutes about a question that's wholly new. How do you go and get that information? Do you have a process for doing it? Do you need to build it? What do you need to put in place? All right. So we're really asking you to push your thinking. If you have a question, if you have a decision, you have a question, how are you going to get the information that's really pertinent to that? If you're committed to making data-informed decisions, how are you going to get that data? Let's go to the next slide. The final slide is developing a plan for answering that question. All right. So this plan is, okay, let's just take that internal data, external data, and new data. All right. Let's talk about what is your plan to analyze, access, process that information. So, you know, if you've identified something in the box above that you need to do, what's the immediate next step on that? Like, how do you get closer to it? Who's going to own that step? Is it you? Is it somebody else in the organization? And we always think this is important. Evidence building costs money. Is there an estimated cost? Cost of time? I'm going to need to spend a week doing all of this, and I actually don't have a week in my calendar right now. I'm going to have to bring on somebody externally to help with this. I'm going to need to pay for some hours of somebody's time. So if you have an estimated cost, great. If you don't worry about it. And what we're able to do with this is, and we didn't put this on a slide, but in that last box, we just ask a couple of things around, are there, you know, 3 immediate next steps that you want to assign an owner to and just get started? Can you lay out those steps on a timeline with an owner to chart the path of the decision? If you are asking a really big question, are you going to need to secure funding or resources or internal buy-in in the organization to be able to get there, to mitigate costs, et cetera? And so we've structured this in a way to just sort of like take you through the arc of how you get from a decision to the data that you may need, the decision to the question that you're asking around it, data you may need to collect around that, whether or not you have it, right, to what you might need to put in place to actually get there. Now, you may already have some internal systems and processes for doing this, particularly around performance data, et cetera. So you might be able to skip a number of these. But the simple purpose of this is just, let's walk from decision through questions, through data, through what you need to do to come up with a roadmap for making a particular decision. All right. So at 4:50, I think Okay, I'm going to meet my promise. I will wrap it around maybe 7 minutes to the hour. But let's get to this last slide here. And this is the last slide in the presentation. For all of those of you who have stuck through, this is the last slide that we'll tell a story about, and then there's a few more slides. Those of you who stuck through to this point, thank you for listening to what I sometimes call Gabe radio. All right, so strategic evidence planning and practice. Okay, so we talked about learning agendas, we talked about strategic learning plans, we talked about how you actually come up with an approach to asking and answering questions. We talked about starting with a decision and working through a simple sheet to lay out what you need to do to answer questions with make decisions, answer questions with data. Let's just talk about one organization that did this, and they found that they need to create an entirely new set of information, right? So again, anonymized, but a partner that we worked with around this time last year. So Summer Learning Network supports a network of tuition-free academic enrichment programs, and they serve children from low-income communities. They have a summer program runs the whole way through the summer in schools with teachers that they pull from those same schools, and really gives a set of playful but also academically enriching programming. And they partner for many years with kids. Some kids have been in the program for 10 years. So how does COVID change the work? They had to pivot the entire thing remote. And I'm sure a number of you have had to do exactly the same thing. So summer of last year, they moved their entire program online. Each affiliate, I have 43 affiliates nationally, had adapted differently, different modes of program delivery, different types of academic support, different emphasis on mental and physical health. Some of them were providing meals, which they had done in their in-person program, and now they're providing meals to whole families. And so they had a big decision. They wanted to know, do we continue to track program quality, collect program quality data for the summer of 2020? Everything's going to look different. All of our program quality measures out the window. All right, what do we do? So that's their decision. Do we continue to do that? And so the learning question they had to answer is, what, if anything, should we collect? Also, what, if we collect it, will it be able to actually tell us about what happened during the summer? To answer this, they decided to go through a participatory process with all of their providers and all of the different 43 sites to really surface what they were doing, what they wanted to know about their program's operation, what their stakeholders wanted to know about their program's operation, and then compare that against the tools that they had and decide how and if they adapt all of their measurement tools, and then go through a process to be able to do that. Collected the information about what everybody in the network wanted to know, and they went back to their measurement tools and they changed that. But the data that they needed to collect about this decision, which is sort of a meta decision, it's a decision about, it's measurement about measurement, right? Is what is most important for everybody to know, and can we design measurement around that? And so they asked for our support with this one decision. Do we continue to track program quality data in summer of 2020? And then, if so, what are all of our learning questions underneath that? How do we go and collect data from our network about what's most important to them? And then how do we act on that, which ended up with them entirely redesigning their suite of measurement. So just leave you with that story, and perhaps that's really pertinent to some of you, perhaps it's very abstract to some of you, but just wanted to sort of see how some of this plays out in practice over the, like I said, the life of a question. If you go to the next slide, like I said, we're leaving you with this tool. You can download it from the handout section. If you go to the next page, just wanted to say, we welcome any questions you have about the tool if you use it, or if you don't, any questions you have about learning agendas. But we just want to land on this last piece that we put in the description, that learning agendas, and you can see this, they evolve over time. It's not an end in itself to have a learning agenda. You stand up these questions, and then it is a very active process to ask and answer these questions, to continuously collect data, to improve, that implies often tweaking the questions. A learning agenda is not an end in itself. It's really just a means to sharpen your questions, really figure out what evidence you need to go track down for decision making. All right, with 5 minutes to spare at the end of the hour, let me turn it back over to Kay and see if there's any live questions or comments that we have.
We have one participant who's planning on starting this tomorrow. So that's good to know. So yay.
Very exciting.
Go team. I have a question for you, Gabe, because this sounds a lot like the growth mindset, that the learning agenda is all about saying, what can I learn? How can we get better all the time? And that maybe these tools are helping to make you focus on just what's the most important thing, because of course there's lots of questions we could ask. Would that be correct?
Okay, I'd say absolutely. I mean, a prerequisite for all of this work and why I'm so excited to have all of you on the call is a real hunger for learning, improvement, growth, really centering on what is most important for the communities that we're serving and how we're best serving them, what's most important for them to get from us. And so, you know, that growth mindset is a great way to think about it. I also think about it as being a learning organization, or being a what I have come to call but haven't really formalized my thinking around, but what it means to be a learning leader, or integrate learning into your work. And it's hard to do, Kay, because you need to build out time for it. You need to set out parts of your schedule to really ask and answer these things rather than just plow ahead. Growth mindset's a great way to think about it.
So we have someone who's working with youth who asks, how could you use this process with youth for long-term goals, for their own long-term goal setting? So not organizationally, just personally.
Well, I would make the form a lot more attractive, and use a lot more of the youth voice in it. But it's a really interesting question. Often we ask ourselves, and in our partnership with nonprofits, to say, what future are you trying to look for? Sometimes we'll even do what we call a history of the future exercise, where we ask people to imagine a point in the future where you've accomplished things, and then ask yourself what would need to be true to get there, right? And so it is fundamentally the same thing about personal growth as it is about organizational growth, about programmatic growth. And so I really think, Kay, that's a fantastic insight from the participant, because working with young people, and I come from a youth development background, we often ask young people, what do you want? What do you want to be? Where do you see yourself, right? And how do we push you to see yourself in even better and bigger places, right? And then what would need to be true for that to happen, and how can we help you make that true in your life, right? And so it's fundamentally a similar process. I love that analogy. But yes, I would make the forms a lot more attractive.
Right, yeah, for sure. But still, to the point, I think it's good to have young people think those big thoughts, like, what do I need to go from A to B, and where do I want to be? So that's super. So thank you, Gabe, for today. People loved it. Someone says a simpler form and youth language. Maybe you could ask your young people to help you create the form. So good idea. Good idea. Let's see, website address in the chat box. So for those of you who are asking, we are going to archive this webinar along with the slides and the tool on the Dibble website. It should be up late this week or early next. So take a look for it there. Thank you for joining us today. There'll be a brief survey. We'd love to hear from you. It's part of our continuous learning. And then there's my information. If you need to contact me, love to hear from you. And finally, next month, we're excited that Ali Fry from Public Strategies was part of a long federal project on developing co-regulation strategies for adults to use to help their young people self-regulate themselves. So they've been putting out reports on it and tools, and we're really excited to have Ali come with us in May. So thank you very much. Thank you, Gabe, for your time. Appreciate it. And we'll all see you in April. Stay safe and sane. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, all. Thank you, Kay. Bye-bye.